And it was a wonderful opportunity we had to bring national speakers to North Carolina today. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker this year's conference, Arthur Brooks. Arthur is president of the American Enterprise Institute, better known as the AEI. The American Enterprise Institute is one of America's oldest, most recognized, and most important public policy think tanks. AEI, as it's often called, is engaged in research and education to expand liberty, improve individual opportunity, and strengthen free enterprise. AEI houses some of the brightest minds and leading scholars in America today, and that's no exaggeration. AEI will start with a concept, an innovative idea, pursue it through academic debate, academic publications and books, to public policy, to enacted legislation. They deserve a major part of the credit for the enactment of welfare reform. It's just one example. So it should be no surprise to learn that its president, Arthur Brooks, is a true leader in the fight for America's future. Arthur is the author of numerous books, but his two most recent works are why we invited him here today to speak to you. The Battle, How the Fight Between Free Enterprise and Big Government Will Shape America's Future is already out. You will have seen this book. I strongly encourage you to read it. And he's going to have a follow-up book, which is coming out shortly, The Road to Freedom, How to Win the Fight for Free Enterprise. And very importantly, this book establishes the moral imperative of free enterprise. It demonstrates that free enterprise embodies the American notion of fairness and service, allowing each individual to live a flourishing and prosperous life. And we do have such strong arguments for what we believe in, both that it is the most moral, ethical, and just system for an economy, for a way of life, a society, plus it will provide the prosperity, help end poverty, and provide a brighter future for ourselves and our children. So North Carolina, from the citizens to elected officials, need to hear these important ideas, and so it's a great pleasure to introduce to you a fellow author, Arthur Brooks.
Thank you, Art. What a gracious introduction. It's a delight to be with you here. Special word of thanks to Art and to the Pope Foundation for their important work with Civitas, which is a truly great organization, well known outside of North Carolina. I can tell you that your concerns are in no way pedestrian. On the contrary, what you're fighting here in North Carolina is what we're fighting all over the United States. And every win you make right here in North Carolina is something we're watching in Washington, D.C. The more you win, the more America wins. So thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing for the United States. Thank you very much. My colleagues at AEI, Wendell Jarvis and Dan Rothschild, we're here and we're delighted to be here with you to talk a little bit about the work that we've got going on in Washington, D.C., what we see as the future of the free enterprise movement, what we see as the challenges facing our movement in Washington, D.C. today and around the country. And I'd like to stand up here and tell you that, boy, are we winning, and boy, is he going to win big this year. But I can't quite tell you that yet. And to tell you why, I want to start with a little story. There was an economist in Washington, D.C., an economist like me, perhaps, who decided he really needed to get away from it all. He got in his car and he drove out of the city, out into the country, and immediately got hopelessly lost. He'd never been on these roads before. Couldn't get back to the city, and all he could see on the side of the road was a farmhouse. So he stopped to ask for directions. Farmer answers the door. He says, "I'm lost. Can you direct me back to Washington, D.C.?" The farmer laughs. He says, "Oh, you city guys, I see it all the time." Gives him directions. The economist says, "Thanks," and as he turns to leave, he notices on the side of the house there's a big field of sheep. Now, as an economist, he's always on the lookout for a profit-making opportunity. So he says, "Sir, if I can tell you the exact number of sheep in this field, can I have one?" Now, the farmer says, "That's absurd. There's no way you could know just by looking at it." "Sure, you're on." Well, the economist has a super secret mental algorithm that he applies within 10 seconds and says, "Sir, you have 863 sheep." Now, the farmer's amazed. He says, "I have no idea how you did that, but I'm as good as my word. Go pick one out." So the economist goes into the herd of sheep, picks one out. He's going back to his car when the farmer says, "Just a second. Before you leave, I've got a question for you. Actually, I have a wager for you, too. If I can tell you what you do for a living, can I have my sheet back? The Economist says, that's preposterous. There's no way you could know that. We just met. Farmer says, aha, you are an economist. The Economist says, that's amazing. How did you know that? Farmer says, simple. You got all the numbers right, but you're walking off with my dog. That's the problem with the conservative movement today. We're getting all the numbers right, but we're missing the main point. We're missing the moral argument for free enterprise. We're not saying the things that really describe why Americans should care about what we care about and should follow us. Let me tell you 4 statistics. Number 1, 70% of Americans say the free enterprise system is the best way to organize our economy despite the recession. 70%. Number 2, 81% of Americans are dissatisfied with the way we are being governed, and that's the highest level all the way back to 1970. Now, that sounds great if you're in the free enterprise movement because now it's time to clean up, but at the same time, here's statistic number 3. 75% of Americans say we should make no change to our entitlement system, and 50% of Americans say we should dramatically increase taxes on the wealthy. All of this stuff basically sums up the paradox of the American system. That paradox is this: as a nation, we love free enterprise and we resent the current state of affairs, but we support policies and policymakers who get us exactly where we are today. What explains this paradox? Well, there are 3 explanations. There's the liberal explanation, the conservative explanation, and the correct explanation. And I'm going to give you all 3. The liberal explanation is this: we don't really love free enterprise. We say we do. We say free enterprise is terrific. We talk about it sentimentally. We say we're a free people living the dreams of America's founders. But what we really want is social democracy, less inequality, and more redistribution. This is how liberals see Americans. They believe that what we really want is a more European-style system. Why are we not happy with our current government? Because we haven't gotten to redistribution yet enough, and because right-wing activists like you and me are fomenting public unrest. If you read Paul Krugman in the New York Times, which I don't recommend, that's what he believes. Now, the conservative explanation for the paradox of the fact that we say we love free enterprise, but we keep taking statism, the conservative explanation is we just haven't hit people with enough good data. Basically, if we could just get in a few more pounds of data on financial crises and economic growth and debt and fiscal consolidation, and we could ram it down their throats with more charts and careful graphs, then America would finally listen. We just haven't brought the truth to them forcefully enough yet. That's wrong, too. Americans do love free enterprise, and we have tried with the data. Believe me, I'm the president of a think tank. We specialize in it. I have so much data, I'm swimming in it. I can show you what's happened to the debt to GDP ratio going back to any year you want. And it's pretty alarming, and I don't like it, and people should be afraid, but that's not getting the job done. The true explanation for the paradox of the American system is this: we love free enterprise in America, but not for materialistic reasons. We love it for moral reasons. We're offered statism by politicians who are basically buying our votes. And there's no objection to this from policymakers on moral grounds, so we take the loot. We take the favors because nobody is offering us a moral alternative. We're left unsatisfied with this system. We don't like where it takes us. We know America's changing. We just can't define exactly why. That's why we're so dissatisfied with the way that we're currently governed. The only way out of this mess is by making truly a moral case for the free enterprise system, to break the cycle and renew our nation. So that's what I want to talk to you about for the next few minutes. I want to talk to you about the moral case for free enterprise, how to make it, and how we're talking about it with today's policymakers in Washington, D.C. I'm going to start off with a little bit of actual research on morality. Believe it or not, there are specialists in the American Academy who talk about moral judgments. And what they find, what research finds, is something that you've always known, which is that people are more moral than they are rational. People are pretty rational sometimes, but they're very moral all the time. We're processing moral judgments all day long, and we process moral judgments more quickly than even rational arguments. Now, I didn't believe this at first, and I needed some proof. So I went to a friend of mine who's the leading expert in moral judgments. He's a professor of social psychology at the University of Virginia. His name is Jonathan Haidt, if you want to look up his work. He's an excellent scholar. And I said, I don't believe all this, that people are more moral than they are rational. He says, I'll give you proof. Because I've done a laboratory experiment using human subjects. I said, wow, tell me about it. He says it goes something like this. I tell them a little story. I bring people into the laboratory, and I tell them a story that they're going to react to morally before they can react to it rationally. I said, well, that's interesting. So what's the story? And the story goes something like this. Now, I'm going to stress that it's a strange little story, but I didn't make it up, so I can't be held entirely responsible for it. There's a family, maybe like mine. I have 3 little kids. So it's mom, dad, 3 little kids. And this family's at war. Mom and dad don't want to get a dog, but the kids are dead set to get a dog. And they're fighting with each other day after day, week after week. Mom, dad, can't we get a dog? Mom and dad say, no, we don't want to. We know who will end up taking care of it. They're messy. You got to walk them. Well, this goes on for a while, and you know how this conflict always ends. Because most of you have had that conflict in your family. The kids always win. And the way it works is first they win over mom, and there's a coalition against dad. And pretty soon dad caves in. And so that's what happens in this family. Finally, dad says, fine. They go down to the pound. They pick out a puppy. They name her Muffin. And they take her home. Turns out mom and dad were wrong. Muffin's a great dog. Muffin loves the kids. Muffin is a perfect member of the family and really brings the family together in a way that nothing else ever has. They're happy with the dog, and they laugh about the fact that mom and dad didn't want to get her. And a couple years go by. Great. Until one summer day in the afternoon, the youngest child, who's 8, leaves the front door open by accident. Muffin sees a squirrel running out across the yard and goes running out after the squirrel, out into the street, and a car hits Muffin and kills her instantly in front of the whole family. The kids are screaming. Mom is crying. Dad's crying a little bit. He loved her too. Dad goes out and picks up Muffin's lifeless body and brings her into the house, into the kitchen, and together as a family they decide to cook her and eat her. You weren't expecting that, is my guess. When I heard that, is that chicken you're eating? I wasn't expecting that the first time I heard it, let me tell you. And he said, what do you think of that story? And I said, you got tenure doing that? So my friend John Haidt, when he's got his subjects in the laboratory, he tells them that story, and right afterward he says, was that the right thing for the family to do? And everybody says, no. And he says, how come? And they say, we don't know. They don't have any idea. They just know it was wrong. And he says, see, you are more moral than you are rational. That's what you do all day long. And then he has an exercise where he tries to help them figure out rationally why it's not okay for them to eat the dog. And there are all kinds of, things that you would argue. Well, it's legal to eat dogs in certain countries. The dog isn't hurt. The dog was already dead and all that. But people keep saying, no, it's just not right to eat your pets. And they can't put a rational reason on it for an hour, sometimes forever. We are more moral than we are rational. Now, the same thing is true when it comes to the free enterprise system. If you are presented with both a moral and a rational argument about free enterprise, you're going to go with the moral argument. There are neurological reasons for this. Your medial prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain behind your forehead, will be dominated by a moral argument and will crowd out the rational argument. And what this basically means is this, practically speaking. Next Thanksgiving, You're sitting around the Thanksgiving table and people are listening to you and you're having an argument with your obnoxious left-wing sister-in-law, okay? And, you know, they're listening to the two of you because, you know, you're a big policy wonk. You're involved with the Civitas Institute. And you're talking about how we get out of this ridiculous recession. How do we get out of this thing? And you say, you know, I've looked at the data. There's only one thing that's going to pull us out of this recession. It's not the government, it's entrepreneurship. The only way we're going to get out of this recession is if we create jobs and opportunity and growth in the private sector, and the only way we're going to do that is by lowering taxes and lowering regulation. It's the only way it's going to happen. It's the only way it's ever happened. And she said, yes, indeed. But wait, she says, you know, yesterday I met a little girl who lives with her mother in a car. Why don't you love her? And you just lost the argument. You might as well tell everybody sitting around the table to go eat their dogs because you're not going to win that argument. She had a preposterous, ridiculous argument, but it was moral, and she captured their brain circuitry. That's what we have to do. Bottom line, the first 3 paragraphs of every argument you make better be about what's written on your heart about the free enterprise system and why you love the freedoms of this country. Then you can go on to the data. Then you can go talk about fiscal consolidation until the cows come home. But if it doesn't start with the morality, you lose. Now, it's pretty shocking that we have to look at social science to figure this out. Because if you go back and look what our founders were talking about 235 years ago, they were moralists. They weren't materialists. They cared about freedom because it was right and it was good and it led to human flourishing. You know the opening, the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence by memory, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, what you may not know is this. Those words were not entirely original to that document. They were adapted from another document called the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was submitted 3 weeks earlier by George Mason. The Virginia Declaration of Rights, however, emphasized life, liberty, and the possession of property. So what happened during the 3 weeks between Virginia Declaration of Rights and the American Declaration of Independence? The answer is that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson decided that the pursuit of happiness was what they needed to emphasize. Why? Because liberty was just a theory in those days. You're not going to get people to fight and die for a theory unless it has a moral basis. The possession of property just doesn't cut it. 235 years later, we don't have to rely on theory about freedom. We have the data. We know it's best. But back then, think about what they were asking our ancestors to do. Extraordinary things for something that was no more than an idea of the freest country in the history of the world. Their promise was moral. The pursuit of happiness. They didn't promise happiness. They promised that you could pursue your happiness if we gave you freedom. That's a moral promise. And if they heard us with our crazy materialistic claims for why free enterprise matters, they would be shocked and they would be saddened. So what did they mean by the pursuit of happiness? Did they mean the ability to make a whole bunch of money? No. We know, in fact, they didn't because they said that's not what they meant. But also, we know that the pursuit of happiness is not related simply to money. Your mother taught you that money doesn't buy happiness, among other things. But we even have economic studies that show that when people get richer above the level of poverty, they don't get happier. That the United States, which has gotten 150% richer per capita since the early 1970s, has not gotten happier on average, not less happy either. And the reason for that is that happiness comes from other things. We don't crave money. We crave something else that comes with free enterprise, and that something else is called earned success. Earned success is the belief that you have created value in your life and value in the lives of other people. And when people say that they have earned their success, they are more likely than anybody else to say they're happy about their lives. I have data from the University of Chicago from about 5 years ago that looks at a very large group of Americans. Say you take 2 people, any place in America, And both of them believe they have earned their success. Furthermore, they have the same level of education, and they're the same age and race, and they came from the same hometown and everything else, but one of them earns 8 times as much as the second. The data say they will be equally happy. You can spread money around all you want. It won't get the job done to help people pursue their happiness. Only earned success will do that. Now, why is that important? Because what's the government good at? Redistribution. The government's good at taking money from you and giving it to somebody else. The government is good at penalizing the makers and rewarding the takers. That's what the government specializes in, right? But that won't make people more happy because it doesn't do anything with earned success. Only you, with your hard work and merit, can earn your success, and only entrepreneurs can make it so. That's the reason that people are dissatisfied, even though we demand crazy things from the government. 77% of Americans say no change to the Social Security system is permissible. 64% of Americans say the government should give free health care to all citizens, right? Terrible stuff. But when Obamacare comes around, when we get the social democratic trends that we've seen over the past 3 years, Americans hate it. Why? Because we're looking for earned success and the government is redistributing money. That's the problem with the government. That is the false promise of the state today. Now, there's a flip side to earned success, and it's called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness has been described by social psychologists now for many years, and it's the phenomenon in which your merit is disconnected from your rewards. No matter how hard you work, you actually aren't rewarded. No matter what you do that's wrong, you're never penalized. It turns out that when people learn helplessness, they become unhappy, they give up, and they blame others for their circumstances. We know this from laboratory experiments as well. There are experiments in which people are putting nickels into slot machines, and they start figuring out pretty quickly that the rewards they're getting are not correlated at all with what's going on with the slot machine itself. What they do is they give up and they say they don't like the experiment. Now, why is that? The answer is because they basically learn helplessness. People want their rewards and punishments to be tied to their behavior. That's the opposite of earned success. People crave earned success and people hate learned helplessness, which is why we don't like the nanny state, even when we appear to demand it. Now, we make lots of mistakes in our lives. One of the mistakes that we tend to make is instead of looking for earned success, we look for money because money is easier to measure. That's called materialism. It's a very, very common error. How does it work? You know, you're going through life, you look for earned success, but you measure money more easily, and you pursue the money. Now, it actually explains a lot of problems that people have. So let me tell you one little interesting factoid that we get from the social psych research on happiness. Psychologists have found, and I verified this with the data myself, that there's an identifiably unhappiest age in a man's life. Okay, women don't have this because women don't have an average unhappiest age. Men have the women are happy. Sorry guys, women are happier. Women are better in every way actually when you look at the data. Yeah, look, I report, you decide. Women don't rob liquor stores. I mean, there's just all kinds of data on this that show that. So, sorry, I'm off subject here. There's an average unhappiest age in a man's life, and it's extremely identifiable on average. What do you think it is? Are you 42? No, he said 40. Yeah, that's right. It's close. 45 years old. The fabled midlife crisis, 45 years old. Now, if you go to psychology and you say, how come 45 is the average unhappiest age in a man's life? Psychologists will give you 2 reasons. And I'll paraphrase the reasons for you. Number 1 is that's when your wife figures out definitively that you're boring, right? Reason number 2 is that's when you're most likely to have an adolescent in the home, which is misery, right? A teenager at home. But it turns out there's an economic explanation too, which is materialism. When men are in their 20s, they're cruising down this superhighway called their careers with neon signs, and basically their earned success and their money are tracking together. And somewhere along the way there's a little exit that they missed called earned success, and they didn't take it. And they figure it out sometime in their mid-40s. That's how materialism works. Economics explains a good deal of why men tend to feel worst in their mid-40s. Earned success means self-awareness. That's what our founders promised us, and that's the true promise of the free enterprise system. It's not material stuff. It is flourishing that comes from understanding ourselves. So, what's the secret to earned success? And the answer is you got to have a system. You got to have a system where your skills and passions can meet, and you got to have a system where you can keep what you earn. That's called the free enterprise system. The free enterprise system is not a wealth machine. The free enterprise system is a happiness machine, in point of fact, and that is a moral promise. Now, if you are to ask the President of the United States, what's the problem with the free enterprise system? He'll go in an entirely different moral direction. He'll say, it's unfair. Fairness is destined to be the most important concept in the 2012 presidential campaign. The president says, the problem with our economy is it's not fair enough. We got a fairness crisis because the rich are so much richer than the poor, and they're not paying enough in taxes. That's, in the nutshell, his argument for fairness, to make a fairer economy. And what's he counting on? He's counting on you not showing up to the debate. He's counting on you changing the subject and talking about economic efficiency. That's a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is this. Why did your ancestors come to America? I'm going to take a guess, and I'm going to say it wasn't to get a fairer system of forced income redistribution. I'm going to take a guess that they wanted to come someplace where they could be rewarded for their merits. You know, we have it's just amazing. We have these letters from my ancestors when they're coming through Ellis Island, and they said nothing about, the government has such good welfare in this country. They talked about wanting to start a farm in South Dakota, which they couldn't do where they were coming from. They wanted to work hard and keep what they earned. That is true fairness. True fairness means rewarding merit, hard work, innovation, and virtue. And true unfairness means taking away what the makers have made to give it to the takers. Now, why don't we hear this? The answer is because we don't show up. We understand that equality of opportunity and rewarding hard work and innovation are what true fairness are, not redistributing wealth. We have a fundamental difference in the definition of fairness, and we have 70% of Americans on our side. 70% of Americans agree with us, and we don't even make the argument. We let the president, in his Kansas speech and his State of the Union speech, walk off with the definition of fairness. We should take the game to the president on this one. We can win everything by taking the game to the president on this one. And here's where it gets even better. Who benefits from the fairest system in the history of the world? Who benefits from all this earned success? You might like to say, the rich. But you'd be wrong. Because the real beneficiaries of fairness and earned success are the poor. I grew up poor. So did some of you, maybe. The people next door to me were keeping chickens in their living room, which I thought was normal at the time. Turns out, not so much. Now things are going pretty well for me. If I don't actually work for the free enterprise system, I'm pulling the ladder up behind me because I'm making it so that people will stay like I was when I was a kid. And that's not right. That's immoral. The free enterprise system is the best system for lifting people up. Think about it. If you go back to 1970, and many of you were alive and thinking about this back then, how much poverty was in the world? The answer is 4 times as much as it is today. world poverty has decreased by about 80% since 1970, extreme poverty, by 80%. Now, we don't hear about that very much because we want to hear from the major news media that life is rotten, that things are getting worse, and that everybody's starving to death, and it's because of capitalism. In point of fact, the world has gotten better, especially for the poor. Why is it? Is it because of central planning? Is it because of socialism? Is it because of the United Nations? Is it because of foreign aid? The answer is no. It's because of free enterprise, innovation, globalization, and world trade. I just got back from China. China alone is responsible for 75% of the reduction in world poverty since 1980. Not because of the communist system, but in spite of the communist system, because of the relaxation on their economy and the unbelievable explosion in free enterprise in that country. In spite of the totalitarian communist regime, capitalist influences have come into that country, and at least 300 million Chinese have been lifted out of poverty. Today, because of free enterprise, people around the world aren't going to die. If that's not a moral consideration, I don't know what is. How do you keep people out of poverty? Foreign aid will fix a little bit. Welfare helps a tiny bit, but if you want to lift people out of poverty by the billions, you got to have a system. And that system is the one that lets people innovate and keep what they earn. That's the free enterprise system. If you are a good Samaritan, if you love the poor, you must fight for free enterprise here and around the world. So let me summarize here. So I'm just about done, and maybe you have something to say, and I can't wait to hear it. Free enterprise allows us to earn our success. Free enterprise is the fairest system. Free enterprise is the system that best lifts up the least among us. Free enterprise is not an economic alternative. Free enterprise is a moral imperative, and we are called to fight for this moral imperative. So how do we do it? How do we do it? Now, here's an easy answer. The election. The 2012 election. Get the election right, and then everything will be okay. It sounds good, but it's wrong. It's really wrong. How do I know that? Because I've lived through both parties. I've lived through people that have gone native as soon as they get to Washington. I lived through Republican presidents and Democrat presidents, and I get more statism and more social democracy and more central planning and more social engineering and more bailouts and more stimulus and more of the junk that's making it harder for entrepreneurs to fix this country and renew our nation. It's not the election. The answer to winning is 10 years of hard work by leaders like you and me. That's what it comes down to. And I'm going to give you an example of how it takes 10 years and why it matters. Now, when I was a kid, there were people in my neighborhood on welfare. A lot of people in my neighborhood on welfare. And it was in the 70s. I was growing up in a neighborhood in Seattle. And my family wasn't on welfare. My dad taught during the year, and he drove a bus during the summer. Okay? Why weren't we on welfare? Because he had this profound little insight. He said, welfare is terrible for poor people. It hurts their lives. Now, it turns out that wasn't really visionary. Everybody knew that. The only people who didn't argue that were politicians. If you asked Republican politicians at the time, why is welfare so bad for America? They'd say it's a colossal waste of taxpayer money, which it was. They made a materialistic argument, and nothing ever changed. Year after year after year, people were stuck in cycles of poverty and dependency, and their lives were ruined until 1984. 1984, something happened, and it was a book. It was a book. Now, that book by Charles Murray, called Losing Ground. Charles Murray, incidentally, is a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. It is my privilege to sign his paychecks. Charles Murray wrote Losing Ground, and that book became a bestseller, and it made one incredibly profound claim. The problem with the welfare system is that it hurts the people it's supposed to help. Incredible, right? You know, if you know one thing about morality, it's don't go hurt poor people. If you think it's okay to go hurt poor people, you were raised by wolves. Everybody knows it's not okay to hurt the poor. Charles Murray said the reason we have to get rid of this welfare system is because it hurts poor people. And when he cut the moral umbilical cord of that terrible system, it was only a matter of time before it reformed. But it took 12 years. 12 years between the introduction of the idea and when Bill Clinton signed the welfare reform legislation in 1996. Now, side note, Barack Obama is trying to unwind every single part of welfare reform. He's trying to take us back to 1978 when I was in middle school. That's what he's trying to do. So stay on this, Civitas. We're looking at it at AEI too. Okay, but what happened with welfare reform? We took the 10 years it took to fight the good fight, and we made the moral case. Those are the two secret ingredients in lasting change. If we want to change the policy environment so that free enterprise renews our country, we better design our fight and decide together that we're going to work together for the next 10 years, no matter what happens in this year's election. No matter what happens in November of 2012. And I know you care an awful lot about it, so do I. But 10 years from now, we still have to be fighting this fight. Because if we don't, if we take our eye off the ball, just one generation can be the end of the free enterprise system in this country. We're in the most important fight of my life. Most important public policy fight of my life, at least. Time is short. Remember, it's a moral fight, not an economic disagreement. It's a fight for what's right, for ourselves, for our children, and for people we'll never even meet. I know you join me in my dedication to winning this fight, or you wouldn't be sitting here today and you wouldn't support this great organization, the Civitas Institute. For what you're doing today, for what you're doing with your lives, for what you're doing for America, my last word is thank you.